This is the human fighter Baran from Reaper Miniatures, and in today's video it's less of a tutorial and just kind of vaguely what colors I was picking. Sometimes you just gotta do a miniature for yourself, which is why this is less of a tutorial and just me kind of talking through what I did. So I knew I was going to want to start with a neutral but on the dark side gray base coat. This was going to help with all of the metal that I wanted to have on this miniature. Now we're using true metallics, and that just means that we're using a metallic paint that actually reflects light, unlike non-metallic where we use a lot of normal paints like grays and blues to kind of replicate that effect. That is because I'm colorblind, and that is a very difficult and complicated subject for me. There are videos on this channel where I have attempted that, and if you'd like to check those out, you're more than welcome to. In any case, I knew that there was going to be a lot of gunmetal on this miniature, so I went ahead and got started with that and blocked it all out. Now, I did know that I was going to have to go back in and redefine some things as we went along, but there were certain things that I wanted to knock out on the miniature early on that I knew wasn't necessarily the best plan of action when it comes to efficiency, but it was going to allow me to really get a good feel for what the miniature was going to look like when it was finished, so I wanted to go ahead and knock those things out early. Ever since I started working on this project of all these townsfolk, I knew that I wanted my city guard to have a lot of teal in them. I wanted that to be the primary color that kind of brought all of the city guard miniatures together. So I went ahead and used these miniatures as an excuse to kind of experiment around with that future paint scheme. And originally I was going to go with black and blue, but using this teal color, I quickly realized that I was just painting Hatsune Miku. And for as funny as that revelation was, I wanted to go ahead and kind of set myself aside from that just a little bit. So I actually made a really deep purple that I painted over all of the black, and I think that that worked out best. Now you'll see that purple later on, but I just wanted to go ahead and explain my method. Moving on to the back of the shield, a lot of times on miniatures the back of the shield is just a plain flat surface. I wanted to go ahead and paint some wooden boards. It didn't need to be anything crazy convincing. I wasn't going for like hyper realistic 3D appearances. If I wanted something like that, before I ever even put the miniature together, I would have put a very thin layer of green stuff over the back, and I would have sculpted some very basic wooden planks. I knew that I was going to be able to use the wood plank paint scheme that I did a video on a few weeks back to basically knock out the bulk of what this was going to look like. And I knew that from the table it was going to look just fine. You know, it's sitting on the table from 1 or 2 feet away while you play a D&D game. You're going to be able to see those details, but it's not going to be something that is going to draw your eye to it. It's just going to be a little extra something that's going to make the miniature pop, but isn't going to be anything that I'm going to have to sink a ton of work into to make it look good. Now again, you can see me kind of doing this black base coat like I said I was going to do originally, and then I just really didn't like how it looked. It wasn't far off from my original priming coat. It was darker, but it still had that same matte finish to it. And I did like the matte finish, so I ended up using this same black to mix into my purple to make sure that I got the matte finish that the black was having. And I really like that like tonal difference that I ended up getting between the matte finish of the cyan color versus the matte finish of the darker purple color that I got. And I'm definitely gonna have to remember which blacks that I used to be able to help do this again in the future, because I really loved the paint scheme that I came up with, and I'm looking forward to doing this on the rest of the town's guard. Keeping things real simple, we just want to go ahead and on all the leathers I went ahead and did a dark brown color kind of just all over everything. Honestly, this darker brown doesn't really matter. It just depends upon like what kind of leather you're doing, whether it's an aged leather, whether it's a tanned leather, whether it's a dyed leather. Any kind of a dark brown or red brown is going to work just fine here if you're following along at home. And then I use XV88 as my way of doing all of my weathering. So this is a nice bright tannish color that works really well. It's still on the brown spectrum, so it still kind of blends in well. And I can also dilute it 50-50 with my dark brown and my XV88 and create a huge range of tonation for creating all different kinds of leather effects. So like if you're wanting to do a similar paint scheme at home on a much larger miniature, I would recommend doing a mixture of those browns instead of just jumping extreme to the highlight. But for as small as these details are, it works just fine for me. Under normal circumstances, this would be where I would show you how I would paint the face. However, I didn't get the shot in focus. The whole shot is out of focus. The camera is focusing on my hands, which are barely on screen because I record with a smartphone, which apparently isn't so smart. Sorry, I'm doing an over-the-shoulder thing, trying to get a better bird's eye view of what I'm doing so that I'm not bumping the camera all the time. I'm just gonna go back to putting the camera right in front of me. It was a pain in the butt for me to deal with and a pain in the butt for me to see, but you guys got a way better view of what I was doing. And I'm sorry about the quality of today's video, but there is enough usable footage that is why you're getting what you're getting. So I do apologize, but in any case, let's crack back into the video. At this point in the video, I'm just kind of bringing in a lot of the gold colors as well as bringing up some of the highlights in the metals, as well as reinforcing and fixing up any mistakes I've made along the way. The way that I painted the face, I used a very generic flesh color and I did 3 coats of that, and then I did a flesh wash on top of it. It just entirely depends on what brands you have available to you is what colors you're going to use. If you guys would like to have a video where I do a more in-depth look on how to paint faces, I could probably find some faces available for 3D printing and then just blow them up and make them about the size of a doll's head, and then we could really do some pretty crazy tutorials probably that way and really exaggerate brush strokes so that you guys can get a good idea of both the basics but also maybe a more advanced video where we do some more advanced techniques. But usually I tend to keep things pretty basics. You'll notice that in the eyes, I don't tend to paint the eyes very often. There are very few miniatures in which I will paint the eyes because I feel like, especially for NPCs, just having kind of a vague-ish black or gray void where the eye should be really just leaves it up to the player's imagination and doesn't distract from the miniature, nor does it distract from the gameplay. Now, I was issued a challenge to go ahead and use some kind of a lime green color in some way, shape, or form on this miniature, and I actually used that as a way of deepening our teal to kind of end up with our shadow color, and I wasn't really happy with it. As soon as I held it up to the miniature there, you can see I'm immediately rethinking that thought, and I kind of just keep processing and I don't really come up with anything that I like. So unfortunately, I couldn't find a way to use lime in this miniature in a way that I thought worked well. It's just too many colors that are just too slightly adjacent to each other on the color wheel and don't really work here. So what I ended up doing is I actually end up using a little bit of a blue-gray color to kind of mix in, and my teal immediately becomes its own shadow, and now I'm mixing in my highlights, and that's when I end up doing some wet blending on the surface of the miniature to really kind of blend everything together. Now, could I have pushed that highlight to a more extreme? I absolutely could have, and I also could have pushed that shadow to more of an extreme, but I want to use these guys as NPCs, so they don't need to be crazy high detail. They can just get the point across and they're going to look just fine. One of the last things I'm doing here is I'm adding some embellishments with some water slide decals. Now these are from a Harlequin set from Warhammer 40k. You can order these off of Game Workshop's website, but tons of people just give them away for free because people don't like dealing with water slides. So if you want to get some stuff like this for your miniatures, consider going in on the Warhammer night for your local game store and just ask around. Hey, does anybody have any Warhammer water slides that they want to get rid of? You would be amazed at some of the cool stuff that you're going to get for free simply by asking that. And there we have it, guys. That miniature is all done, or I should say miniatures. As you can see, we actually were working on 2 of them the whole time. These guys are meant to be more like city guards that were sent by the main kingdom, and not necessarily people that live in the town where they're probably serving. But that having been said, that's why their equipment is a little bit nicer than probably the average city guard. In any case, I really love these guys. They were a lot of fun to work on, especially adding all the little weathering bits at the end here. I know I didn't really include those in the original video, but it wasn't anything magical, so I didn't feel the need to include me recording that. And as always, guys, may your display case always be filled, and your pile of shame never runs empty. Thanks so much for watching.